2 days after Christmas of 1993, 38-year-old Latricia White was found shot to death in bed at her rural Central Texas home. While investigators quickly determined that the nurse and mother of two had been killed in her sleep, they could not account for her live-in boyfriend, Lee Wackerhagen, and his 9-year-old son, Chance. 3 days later, after finding Lee's truck abandoned in East Austin with blood in the bed, authorities obtained a warrant charging him with first-degree murder. It was simple, investigators thought. The couple had argued, and after murdering Latricia, Lee had fled and committed a non-custodial abduction of his son. For more than 20 years, that is exactly as the case remained. However, in May of 2016, the Texas Rangers released a statement that completely turned the case on its head. No longer was Lee the prime suspect, and instead, they now believed that both he and Chance had likely been killed the same day as Latricia. As it turned out, there was another possible suspect who the original investigators had completely ignored for reasons that no one can yet understand. Latricia's ex-husband, with whom she'd had a hostile divorce and was at the time engaged in a bitter custody dispute. This is Trace Evidence, episode 240, The Murder of Latricia White and the Disappearances of Lee and Chance Wackerhagen. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today we examine a mysterious and heartbreaking crime that left a young mother dead and a father and son missing and later presumed killed. It's a frustrating case filled with rumors and speculation, all constructed on the shaky foundations of a half-hearted and poorly conducted investigation. This is episode 240, The Murder of Latricia White and the Disappearance of Lee and Chance Wackerhagen. Latricia Gail White was born on Thursday, November 10, 1955 in Austin, Texas, to parents Jack and Susan. Latricia was the Whites' first child, though they would later have another daughter, making Latricia an older sister, a role friends and family say she reveled in as a youngster and even into her adult years. Latricia was a sweet, kind, and caring child who showed and expressed an interest and affinity towards helping others whenever she saw the opportunity. In an interview with KXAN Austin, Susan noted that her daughter had always just been that way, saying, quote, "She was a very sweet girl, very soft-hearted, gentle. She loved to help people, and she would just do about anything for most anybody." End quote. Though born in Austin, Latricia would spend much of her life living south of Travis County in and around Lockhart, a smaller city which functions as the seat of Caldwell County. She would go on to attend Lockhart High School, where she performed well academically and was involved in several clubs and groups. It was during her time at Lockhart that she would meet and eventually get into a relationship with an older student, Lee Herman Wackerhagen Jr., who frequently went by his nickname Dub, D-U-B. Dub was born on Saturday, September 19, 1953 in Caldwell County to parents Margaret and Lee Herman Sr. Dub had two older sisters and would be the Wackerhagen's last-born child, and thus his father frequently referred to him as Junior. Dub grew up predominantly in the area of Maxwell, an unincorporated community in Caldwell County where his father owned and operated a large farm. Over the years, houses would be erected on some of the family property, allowing for relatives to live close to one another in the wide-open country just off Valley Way Drive, approximately 11 miles west of Lockhart. Dub has been described by friends and family as a caring, fun-loving guy. Despite his reputation as a quiet and polite person, strangers could easily be intimidated as by his teenage years, Dub cut an imposing figure, standing at approximately 6 feet 4 inches tall. When he and Latricia came together at Lockhart High, there was a mutual attraction that quickly developed into young love. However, the world had different plans in store for the young couple as, following Dub's graduation, they would drift apart and their romance would come to an amicable but no less disappointing end. In June of 1974, when she was 18 years old, Latricia married for the first time to a man named David Roger. The marriage would be short-lived, with the two having a daughter before ultimately divorcing in September of 77 after just over 3 years. A young mother, Latricia never lost focus on her career goals and would enter a nursing program, which seemed to fit together perfectly with her tendency towards helping others and her appreciation of service-oriented careers. Somewhat mirroring Latricia's experiences on his own side of Texas, Dub too would find himself married in May of 1980, but it would be short-lived as by April of 82, the couple would divorce just 1 month shy of their 2-year anniversary. Latricia married for a second time to a man named Ronald Kadlicek in February of 1981. 1 year later, in December of 82, she gave birth to a second and last child, a son the couple would name Clinton. Unlike her first marriage, this one seemed to be based on a stronger foundation and would certainly run a greater distance. Never seeing herself as simply a stay-at-home mother, although she loved and doted on her children, Latricia obtained her nursing license and would eventually pick up work in San Marcos, the seat of Hays County, approximately 18 miles west from Lockhart. She was employed at the Central Texas Medical Center, where she worked for Dr. W. Kern Deschner at Gastroenterology of San Marcos. Coworkers and friends would describe Latricia as a hardworking, dedicated nurse with an innate ability to soothe and comfort others. Patients praised Latricia's work ethic, and many specifically requested her when they arrived for their appointments. As for Dub, things were going pretty well. He picked up a new job, and by happenstance, he would find himself developing a relationship with his boss's daughter, Gay Williams. Over the course of the next few months, the relationship grew deeper, and on Sunday, September 2nd, 1984, Gay gave birth to a son the couple went on to name Chance Lee Wackerhagen. Chance was Gay's second. She had another son in a previous marriage, but he was Lee's first and only. The proud father was extremely taken by the little boy, and while he was very loving and caring, he's also been described as overprotective, and this created a clash between he and Gay. According to her, Dub treated her firstborn extremely poorly and held Chance up on a pedestal. If the two got into trouble, Dub would discipline the other child while making up excuses as for why Chance didn't need to be punished. This behavior, stacked with other issues that had developed between Dub and Gay, would ultimately destroy their relationship. I use the term relationship primarily because there wasn't a proposal or typical marriage between the two, who instead were together long enough to be defined as a common law marriage. County records show the issuance of that marriage license granted between the two in February of 1984. Dub ultimately picked up work as a big rig truck driver, and while his absence from the home helped alleviate some of the issues between he and Gay, it also served to highlight the increased tension and stress when the two were together. For Gay, it was Dub's treatment of her son and their increasing arguments about it that really broke the camel's back. Not to mention, Gay found herself as the victim of what she'd later describe as Dub's controlling nature and verbal abuse. Worried that, with Chance getting older, he'd be negatively impacted by their arguments and shouting matches, she made the decision to seek a divorce. The couple separated, and their divorce was finalized in 1991. Although Dub fought for custody, primary care was granted to Gay while he was allowed weekends. Gay was then living in Kingsville, approximately 200 miles south from Maxwell. Due to conflicts between the former couple, they made arrangements to exchange custody of Chance through the home of one of Dub's aunts. Essentially, one parent could drop the child off, allowing the other to pick him up without the two ever needing to see each other, which was preferential to each, since coming together only seemed to lead to arguments or disagreements and more bad blood. While Dub's marriage had hit the rocks, Latricia's was also crumbling. After 10 years with Ronald Kadlicek, she made the decision to leave and file for divorce in 1991. There appears to have been somewhat of a back and forth between the two, and over the course of the next few years, a bitter dispute would break out revolving around custody of their son, Clinton, though their problems were vastly more extensive. Friends would later note that Latricia had implied some form of abuse during the marriage and expressed fear about how her soon-to-be ex responded to conflicts and fights between them, with tensions escalating to an intolerable point. It was in the latter months of 1991 when Dub and Latricia encountered one another again, and more than a decade after they had dated in high school, they decided to give it another shot. Things had changed since they were teenagers, but their lives had followed similar paths, and they both found one another single, divorced, and with children from previous relationships. While some would note that the couple were happy to have found one another and excited as they looked towards the future, others felt that it was more of a casual relationship that was unlikely to have long-term future. For his part, Dub was apparently head over heels for his former high school flame, while Latricia's mother didn't believe her daughter felt the same. She would later tell the Austin News, quote, "He did his thing and she did hers, and I don't think it was as serious as he thought it was." End quote. Dub ultimately moved in with Latricia, and the two lived at her home, then located off FM 713 at the end of County Road 82, approximately 9 miles southeast from Lockhart. The home was located in a very rural area, right at a dead end of what is today Chestnut Road, in an area known as McMahon, on land owned by her family. According to friends and family, the relationship between Dub and Latricia was moving along well, but by the middle of '93, they had traveled down a few bumpy roads together. Much as had been the case with his marriage to Gay, Dub continued to revere Chance to a degree that he wouldn't discipline him and took offense to anyone else who might attempt to do so. This led to many clashes between he and Latricia as, being a mother of two, she had no qualms about telling Chance when he had done wrong. By the fall of '93, Chance was 9 years old and Latricia's son Clinton was 10, and the two got along well. Reportedly, other issues began creeping in, and as had previously been the case, Dub was more likely to dole out discipline to Latricia's son while allowing Chance to skate. This frustrated Latricia and became a contentious point between the two. However, it wasn't just an issue for Latricia. Some people have since stated that her ex-husband, Kadlacek, was infuriated when he came to learn that Dub had been disciplining his son and his ex-wife had been allowing it to happen. This apparently made the divorce and dispute between the two even more volatile, as Kadlacek was apparently fighting to obtain full custody of their son. Their divorce would be finalized on Tuesday, November 2nd, 1993, just 3 weeks prior to Latricia's 38th birthday and 7 weeks before she would be brutally murdered and Dub and Chance vanished. By December of '93, Latricia and Dub's relationship had certainly had its share of ups and downs, but friends and family noted that was sort of how they were together. There was a steady ebb and flow. One day, they'd be peaceful, happy, and sweet to one another, and the next they'd be screaming about one problem or another. But people noted, even when the arguments went nuclear, the couple would be seen together just the next day getting along like nothing had happened at all. At the same time, Dub was in the process of building a home in Maxwell on his family's land that he planned on moving into with Latricia, and they had continued living together in her home. If the relationship was as tenuous as some have suggested, this didn't seem to play much of a role in how the couple handled their plans for the future. Unfortunately, the house would never be finished, and the Christmas holiday, a time of joy and celebration, would be at the center of a dark and disturbing mystery that continues to endure more than 30 years later. On Friday, December 17th, Dub picked up Chance for his visitation and reportedly was scheduled to return the boy to his mother on Christmas Day, allowing each to spend part of the holiday with him. The next few days passed without any issues, but in the days leading up to Christmas, it was reported by a friend of the couple that they had gotten into a major argument revolving around Chance. Reportedly, the child had left a faucet running and the sink had overflown, leading to some mild water damage. Latricia was very upset about this, but when she confronted Chance, as always seemed to be the case, Dub came to his son's defense and the two exchanged heated words. The argument became so intense that Dub apparently told Chance to gather up his things, telling Latricia that not only were they leaving, but they were moving out. Dub did not, however, follow through on his threats, and the couple appears to have stuck to their normal pattern of an explosive argument followed by a calm and peaceful environment. However bad the argument might have been, it didn't appear to have any reverberating effects or really any kind of an impact on Chance. The next day, on Christmas morning, Saturday the 25th, he picked up the phone and called his mother back in Kingsville. He explained how excited he was and how much he loved his gifts, noting specifically that he'd received an Old West-style duster and some G.I. Joe figures. However, his call wasn't just to discuss the gifts. He also had a request. Chance wanted to know if it would be all right for him to stay with his father for a few more days. Gay agreed, thinking nothing of it, and told Chance to call her later so they could make arrangements for him to come home. But that call would never come, and all these years later, Gay still blames herself and regrets agreeing to the extension. After spending their morning at Latricia's home opening gifts, the trio headed over to her parents' house to spend a few hours celebrating with them. According to Susan, Latricia's mother, things weren't so great between the couple that day. Apparently, Dub asked Latricia if she would be making the 3-hour drive with him down to Kingsville to return Chance, but she wasn't interested, and this led to a conflict. Susan later said, quote, "Christmas Day, she seemed kind of on edge. He said something to her when they were over here at Christmas for her to ride with him, and she said, 'I'm not going.'" End quote. How extreme the conflict between the two was, no one has ever commented, but it doesn't appear to have been a major issue as they all returned to Latricia's home together that night. The following day, Sunday, December 26th, would be the last time any of the three were seen alive. According to multiple news sources, a person identified only as a jailer working for the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department reported seeing all three together at a restaurant in Lockhart. According to the witness, Dub and Latricia appeared to be getting along well, quietly chatting across the table, while Chance was with them and seemed happy and doing well himself. No one can say for certain what happened after they left the restaurant that day, and that question remains unanswered more than 3 decades later. The first time anyone noticed that something might be wrong was the next day, the morning of Monday, December 27th. Latricia was set to return to work that day, but she never arrived, nor did she call in to say she wouldn't be able to make it. Co-workers, knowing her work ethic, found this to be extremely out of place. Over the course of the morning, they placed multiple calls to her home, but the phone went unanswered. With each call, their concern grew a little more. Finally, towards the end of the day, after not hearing back, they decided to reach out to her parents, who were surprised to learn that she didn't arrive at work that day. Latricia's father, Jack, decided to make the short trip over to his daughter's home, and while her vehicle was parked in the driveway, no one answered the door. Entering the house, Jack called out for his daughter, but received no response. It didn't take long for him to learn the horrible reason why. At approximately 6:30 p.m., Jack stepped into his daughter's bedroom and found her lifeless body in her bed. He would later tell Unsolved Mysteries, quote, "I just called her name, and then I went over and felt her, and I knew that she was dead." End quote. Devastated, Jack dialed 911, and the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office immediately dispatched deputies to the rural home. Upon arrival, it was reported that investigators were not immediately aware that they were on the scene of a homicide. How that's true, I don't know, but keep that statement in mind as we proceed through more information about the scene inside the home. Mark Hanna, then chief deputy, explained to the Austin American-Statesman that it appeared Latricia had been shot multiple times in the head while she had been asleep. Deputies on the scene could find no indication of a struggle, no signs of forced entry, no weapons inside the home, and no signs that anything had been stolen. Deputies reported that Latricia's body was removed from the scene and moved north into Travis County, where an autopsy was ordered by George Miller, a Caldwell County Justice of the Peace. Lacking a suspect or any indication of what might have led to Latricia's murder, investigators noted that they would be conducting interviews with friends and family over the next few days. Initial interviews brought Dub and Chance to their attention, noting that they were absent from the home that morning. Not long after the discovery of Latricia's body, a deputy picked up the phone and called Gay to ask her if her son was with her and whether or not she had seen or interacted with her ex-husband. Gay explained that her son hadn't yet been returned and she hadn't seen Dub, at which time investigators informed her that Latricia had been killed and neither Chance nor Dub had been located. Reportedly, there was some information exchanged to give the worried mother the belief that her son might have witnessed the crime. While not revealing much at the time, it was later explained that the reason investigators theorized that Chance might have seen what happened was due to the fact that they found a shoe print in blood that reportedly matched up with the type of shoe Chance was known to wear. Now, if it was obvious to investigators that Latricia had been shot in her sleep, and there was enough blood on the floor for a footprint to be left behind, how exactly were they at first unaware that they had arrived at the scene of a homicide? I would also ask, if the scene was so messy and obvious, why did Caldwell County Sheriff Dan Law later tell KXAN News, quote, "It was cleaned up. Somebody had taken the time to clean something up before they left. We literally were looking for a needle in more than one haystack," end quote. It certainly doesn't sound like the scene was all that well cleaned up, but I digress. By Wednesday, December 29th, investigators had interviewed multiple people, including Latricia's family. Curiously, it was reported that her father, Jack, told detectives he could not think of any enemies nor anyone who may have wanted to harm his daughter. Yet, it appears quite apparent that once they learned of Dub and Chance, investigators began focusing in on the missing pair, believing it was likely Dub had killed Latricia and then fled with his son. What evidence or information they acquired to get to that conclusion has never been revealed, and many believe that Dub's absence gave them enough suspicion to believe he had to have been involved. Later that same day, the autopsy results were returned from Travis County and several disturbing details were revealed. Firstly, it was reported that Latricia had been shot in the head 6 times with a .22 caliber weapon theorized to have been a revolver. Though police have never given any additional details about the likely murder weapon, it has been surmised that a lack of shells at the crime scene suggested a revolver may have been used. In addition to this, the medical examiner determined that Latricia had been dead for between 24 and 36 hours when her body was found, placing the time of death between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Sunday, December 26th, the last day she, Dub, and Chance were seen alive. So deputies found themselves in a confusing situation. They clearly had a murder victim, but they weren't sure what exactly had happened to Dub and Chance. They stuck to the theory that Dub had likely killed Latricia and then absconded with his son, but they weren't sure which direction to go. Digging into his life, when they learned that Dub worked as a truck driver, they assumed that meant he knew a lot of people around the country and might be able to disappear for a while without being found. They also reported to the media that they should keep an eye out for the father and son, noting that Dub's knowledge of the roadways might afford him the ability to travel by lesser-known back roads, aiding him in avoiding a statewide bolo. Then Sheriff Michael Bading explained, quote, "He was a truck driver. He could be anywhere. He knows a lot of people," end quote. Unsure of what exactly they were working with, a discovery the following day would change everything. At approximately 1 a.m. on Thursday, December 30th, Dub's 1986 green Ford pickup truck was located abandoned off Manor Road in East Austin, a location police would later refer to as a high-crime area. The vehicle was found around 40 miles northwest from Latricia's home, and while it was in a fully operable condition, a search by police would uncover several strange and concerning facts. Investigators found Dub's wallet and checkbook in the truck, as well as a .22 caliber hunting rifle. At first, they believed they might have located the murder weapon, but testing would later show that the rifle hadn't been fired recently and the bullets used did not match the size of those recovered from Latricia's body. In the bed of the truck, they reported finding a toolbox, spare tire, and a series of Christmas gifts, some opened, others still wrapped. Deputies would later note that the bed of the truck and the gifts were streaked with blood. But Gay later stated she was told by police that there was a considerable amount of blood in the bed of that truck and not just streaks. Investigators began to put things together. They theorized that Dub, after murdering Latricia, had traveled to a bad part of Austin and abandoned the truck in hopes someone might steal it, thus tainting the evidence and possibly having the vehicle never recovered. Of course, there were a few problems with this. With considerable blood in the bed, it would suggest that Latricia's body had been moved, but there was no evidence to say she was killed anywhere other than in her bed. They wondered if perhaps Dub had been injured during the crime, but they found it hard to believe he could lose that much blood and still get away. All things equal, if Dub had done this, he probably wouldn't have needed to go out of his way to try and get that truck stolen, since the ability of these investigators was so severely limited they were likely to screw the case up anyway. The abandoned truck, the blood found in the bed, and multiple statements from friends and family that Dub and Latricia frequently argued led investigators to be more convinced that Dub had killed her. Chief Deputy Mark Hanna would later tell reporters that they knew for a fact that Dub was at the home on Sunday, the day of the murder, and that he had not yet returned his son to his mother. Reportedly, Dub had some kind of an early cell phone mounted in this truck, and when police had the line tested, they discovered that someone had made a 10-minute phone call from the truck after Latricia's body was found, but before the vehicle was. No additional details about the call were revealed, and whether or not police knew who the call had been made to was never stated. Less than 12 hours after discovery of the truck, and just 4 days after the murder, an arrest warrant was issued charging Dub with first-degree murder. Sheriff Bading, in statements to local media, reported that investigators believed Dub had Chance with him, and although he had no prior record, they considered him to be armed and dangerous. Photographs and descriptions of both Dub and Chance were released to the public, and anyone who might have seen them was advised to contact authorities, but not to approach them, as the situation could quickly turn violent. Around the same time the arrest warrant for Dub was being issued, Latricia's family were grieving deeply as they attended the 38-year-old's funeral. Taking place at 2 p.m. at McCurdy's funeral home in Lockhart, hundreds of people came to pay their respects to the nurse and mother of two. Latricia was laid to rest in Delhi Cemetery beneath the stone reading, "Wonderful daughter, sister, mom, but most of all a friend. We loved her, but God loved her best." It was a massive blow to the community, many of whom had known Latricia since she'd been a child and who were either friends with her, attended clubs and organizations she was a part of, or who were patients that appreciated her tenderness and care. 2 weeks later, though, the case was already growing cold. The discovery of Dub's truck had bolstered the efforts of investigators, but little else had developed, and what they did find turned out not to point in the exact direction they had presumed. Detectives were shocked when they were informed that the blood in the bed of the truck did not belong to Latricia White. It wasn't even her blood type. While for some, that required them to look at the case a little differently, others were unmoved and continued the investigation with sharp focus on Dub and Dub alone, what some might call tunnel vision. Whether evidence pointed toward or away from Dub, he remained their prime suspect, with Chief Deputy Hanna telling the Lockhart Post-Register that Dub was not only their main suspect, he was their only suspect. Chance, who was supposed to return to school back in Kingsville on January 5th, still had not been sighted, nor had he contacted his mother. While police believed Dub had killed Latricia, they were more skeptical about how he would treat his son. Gay acknowledged that her relationship with Dub had been an unhappy one, with him being verbally abusive, but she made it clear that even if he had killed Latricia, she didn't believe Dub would ever lay a violent hand on their son. She went so far as to refer to him as a devoted father, and she believed that he had likely gone south, crossing the border into Mexico to avoid authorities and to start a new life raising Chance. Since Dub had failed to bring Chance back to his mother, Kingsville officials filed a second arrest warrant, this one charging him with interference with child custody. Considering potential flight from the state of Texas and the possibility of Dub heading into Mexico, the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department would be aided in their investigation by the Kingsville Police, Texas Rangers, and the FBI. For their part, the feds issued a third warrant for Dub's arrest, charging him with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Despite the issuance of all these warrants, there were no sightings of Dub, and calls and tips continued to dry up. Friends of Latricia's, interviewed by authorities, suggested that Dub had been a controlling and jealous man, and they theorized that he may have lashed out at her in response to a breakup. Latricia's mother thought along the same lines, saying, quote, "I think she just told him the relationship was over and he just couldn't take the rejection." End quote. 1 month later, in February of 1994, the case was featured on America's Most Wanted, and Gay was there to plead for her son's safe return. The segment drew in a lot of viewers, and while there was initially hope for some developments, Gay later stated that police had told her they'd gotten a few calls and potential leads, but little else, and those leads seemingly went nowhere. In April of 94, 4 months after the murder, Gay's father, O.P., received a rather upsetting call at his home. Picking up the receiver, he heard the voice of a young boy on the other end who cried out, "Help me, help me." And then it sounded as if someone yanked the phone out of his hand and the line went dead. He was absolutely convinced that it was Chance's voice on the other end of the line, and this was deeply unsettling and heartbreaking. However, further investigation led detectives to conclude that the call had been little more than a cruel and callous prank. Devastated, Gay couldn't sit by and wait for answers or hope that the police would find her son. She was frustrated by the situation and desperately wanted to bring Chance home. She hired a private investigator to try and locate them, and worked with her employer to establish a reward fund for information. She wrote letters to President Clinton asking for assistance in finding her son, and she kept in close contact with Tommy Ratliff, a Texas Ranger in charge of the investigation. Gay explained to the Corpus Christi Caller-Times, saying, quote, "I call him probably every other day during the week. Nobody's been able to do anything or find him. I don't know what else to do." End quote. But she didn't stop there. She continued to try and fight and to locate her son. She reached out to 3 organizations that specialized in missing children and continued to try and keep the case in the media. Whether it was in newspapers or on television shows, she just wanted to keep Chance's face and name alive. Tommy Ratliff noted that media coverage had resulted in a lot of leads, but by September of 94, 9 months after the murder, all he could really say was that they continued to follow up on leads and were actively pursuing the case. 3 months later, December marked 1 full year, and investigators appeared no closer to finding answers than they had initially been. Chief Deputy Hanna, asked about the case a year later, simply replied, quote, "We're still working on the case, but we haven't had any leads. I don't think he's anywhere around here." End quote. 2 months later, in February of 1995, Unsolved Mysteries agreed to run a segment featuring the case. At the time, the show was in the midst of building a massive audience, and it was believed that this kind of coverage might be able to break things open. Tommy Ratliff was thrilled with the publicity and believed it could really help them narrow down and pinpoint where Dub might have fled to. He explained, quote, "I've been working on it since 3 days after it happened, and it seems like I work on it every week. Something's happening all the time on this case. Generally, it doesn't take this long to be able to find somebody. At this point in time, he could be anywhere. We've had lots of calls from all over the country on sightings. We couldn't pinpoint exactly where. With the wide base this television station will put out, it will assist us in finding him and the little boy." End quote. Ratcliffe noted there had been hundreds of tips and reported sightings, but police had never been able to confirm any of them, nor had they tracked down Dub or Chance. Over the course of the next few years, while Gay did everything she could to try and find her son, the case continued to grow colder and coverage began dropping off. Newspapers and television shows seeking the newer, hotter cases only wrote small blurbs or articles showing photos of Dub and Chance and asking for anyone who had information to contact authorities. As years began winding on, Gay tried to maintain a relationship with Dub's family, believing they were all hoping for the same thing, to see their loved one returned home. However, the more time passed, the more difficult it became to suppress the paranoia and the frustration. leading many, including Gay herself, to wonder if perhaps Dub's family knew more than they were saying, or if it was possible that one or more of them might have aided Dub in fleeing the area. She would later state, quote, "I believe Lee killed his girlfriend and took my son, and I believe his family knows something." End quote. For their part, Dub's family emphatically denied the accusations, stating that if they knew where Dub or Chance were, they would have told authorities immediately. Dub's sister, Barbara, interviewed for Unsolved Mysteries, would state, quote, "We haven't heard anything from him at all, and that tells me he's got to be dead." End quote. Tragically, on Wednesday, July 14th, 1999, Dub's father, Lee Herman Wackerhagen Sr., died at the age of 80. Authorities investigating the case would later determine that Sr. had taken his own life. While some believe this provided evidence that he had guilt over his potential involvement in helping Dub escape from murder charges, others have suggested that a terminal cancer diagnosis had led the elder Wackerhagen to take his own life rather than slowly dying in a hospital bed. As it stands today, no one has ever clarified if in fact they know. 2 years later, in August of 2001, nearly 8 years after the murder and double disappearance, Chance's computer-enhanced photo was featured on direct mail cards over a 6-week campaign. The photo showed Chance as he would have looked then at 17 years old and was estimated to have been delivered to nearly 7 million homes. The card also featured images of Dub with information that he could be armed, dangerous, and potentially suicidal. Hopeful but heartbroken, Gay was asked how she felt nearly a decade later and replied, quote, "This is the most difficult experience for a mother, wondering the conditions her son is living in and if he's even alive. I dream about him, and he's alive in my dreams, so that gives me the hope and energy to make it through the day." End quote. The next year, in May of 2002, the Texas Department of Public Safety added Dub to their list of their 10 most wanted fugitives. In January of 2010, 17 years after Latricia was murdered, Hector Gomez, a United States Marshal taking a new look at the case, sat down for an interview with KXAN Austin News and gave them a look into the somewhat skewed mindset investigators had regarding their hunt for Dub and Chance. Gomez confirmed that the blood found in the bed of Dub's truck did not belong to Latricia and that at the time, they were awaiting the results of testing conducted at the University of North Texas Crime Lab to determine if it belonged to Dub or perhaps Chance. Gomez went on to state that they believe Dub had assistance in escaping, likely from members of his family. His reasoning for this statement, because Dub's family had an obituary published more than a decade after he was last seen alive. Gomez noted, quote, "It just comes right at us that, if you want to make somebody dead, you put an obituary in the paper." End quote. I had no idea that was how you made someone dead, but I digress. With this caliber of investigative skill, I struggle to understand how this case has remained unsolved for so long. He then went on to state, while a life insurance policy did exist for Dub, no one had ever made an attempt to cash it in. Gomez then felt confident enough, despite seemingly no solid evidence, to claim that they knew that Dub was still alive after the murder, saying, quote, "There's no question in our mind that Lee Wackerhagen was at least alive several days later." End quote. Why and how did they come to that conclusion? That part he chooses not to share. Then Sheriff Dan Law agreed with Gomez and stated his belief that the father and son were likely living under assumed names in Mexico, saying, quote, "And that's just where all the signs lead to." End quote. He doesn't share what any of those signs were, however. Latricia's mother agreed, saying that while some had theorized that Dub and Chance might be dead, she had no doubt that at least Dub was still alive out there somewhere. Of course, while these statements are interesting and attention-grabbing, they're little more than opinions, as investigators to this day have never provided a single scrap of evidence to show Dub and Chance fled to Mexico, let alone to even prove that they are alive. If you think I'm being a little hard on investigators here, you're about to find out exactly why. 5 years later, in 2015, 22 years after the murder, Gay was contacted by a Texas Ranger who was reinvestigating the cold case, and he was less than impressed with the initial work done by deputies back in '93. According to Gay, the Ranger told her that while the blood in the bed of the truck has never been identified, DNA testing had confirmed that it belonged to two separate individuals who were related to one another, like perhaps a father and son. In addition to this revelation, the officer told Gay that there had been a massive mistake committed early on. Remember that 10-minute phone call made from Dub's truck after Latricia's body was found but before the truck was discovered? As it turned out, that call was made in 1992, 1 year prior to the murder, not within days or hours of it in '93. Gay also learned that Dub had some reason to stick around Texas. On Monday, December 27th, hours before Latricia's body was discovered in her bed, a lawyer employed by Dub had filed paperwork in family court. Dub, it appeared, had decided to take Gay to court where he wanted to fight for full custody of their son. To many, this seems an odd approach to take if someone were planning to kill their girlfriend and skip town. Gay was caught off guard by this news, having never picked up on Dub's plans, and her ex apparently never mentioned anything about taking her back to court. The Ranger, going out on a limb, told Gay that it was his belief, having re-examined all of the available evidence, that Dub and Chance were likely killed the same day as Latricia, and that Dub's truck was used to move their bodies. To him, it seemed apparent. Investigators had developed tunnel vision, and they ignored any evidence that stood to exclude Dub, focusing in only on that which fit their narrow view of the case. As it turned out, Dub was not the only person who may have wanted to harm Latricia, and in fact, multiple people had told detectives about another man as early as the first day of the investigation. But for reasons which have never been explained, detectives chose to ignore that other man and focused only on Dub. Who was that other man, you ask? Well, Latricia's ex-husband, Ronald Kadlicek. For reasons passing understanding, when the initial investigation kicked off, all focus turned towards Dub and away from Kadlicek. This, despite the fact that members of Dub's family, friends of his, and friends of Latricia all pointed out that she and Kadlicek were engaged in a bitter custody dispute over their son. Latricia left Kadlicek in '91, but their divorce wasn't officially finalized until November 2nd, 1993, 7 weeks before the murder. Several people stated that Latricia was afraid of her ex-husband and that Kadlicek was allegedly very angry about the fact that Dub had disciplined his son. According to Gay, the Ranger told her that when confronted by authorities, Kadlicek had allegedly admitted to being at Latricia's house on the day of the murder. However, he claimed that their son had left a toy behind, and when she didn't answer phone calls, he went directly to the home. Allegedly, he knocked on the door, received no answer, and then left. However, some have theorized that Kadlicek admitted to being there because, with the home being at the end of a dead-end road, he worried someone might have spotted him or his vehicle in the area. In an interview conducted on the Lost and Found podcast, one of Dub's close friends, Thad Reagan, stated that Kadlicek was the first person he thought of. When he learned of the murder and of Dub and Chance's disappearance, Reagan went up in a plane with a friend and they flew around the area surrounding Latricia's property, searching for signs of turned-over dirt. Reagan said they had done this because, as part of his job working for the city of Smithville, Texas, Kadlicek had access to heavy machinery, and Thad thought it was possible that Dub and Chance had been killed and buried somewhere nearby. According to Reagan, several people theorized that Kadlicek might have been involved, but investigators at the time simply hadn't seemed interested in pursuing that possibility. Reagan went on to claim that Dub had told him of some odd happenings in the weeks leading up to the murder. Allegedly, strange vehicles were seen driving down to the end of the road, sitting by Latricia's home for a few moments, and then pulling away. Dub apparently wondered aloud whether Latricia, himself, or both of them were actively being stalked or watched. Gay would later state in an interview with Lost and Found that she was told by a member of law enforcement that they had approached Kadlachek after establishing him as a potential person of interest and requested that he take a polygraph, but allegedly he declined that offer. 1 year after learning all of this information from the since-retired Texas Ranger, some of the details were released publicly. In May of 2016, 23 years after the crimes, the Texas Department of Public Safety issued a press release noting that they had since discovered evidence to suggest that both Dub and Chance were victims of foul play. Though revealing little, their statement read in part, quote, "Investigators found nothing in the home appeared to be missing and believe that this murder was most likely a crime of passion committed by someone closely associated to one or more of the victims." End quote. The Texas Rangers, through their review of the cold case, requested assistance from the public and asked for anyone with information to come forward. They noted that they would need additional evidence to move forward with the case and that they would like to recover Dub and Chance's bodies, believing both were likely killed at the same time or within hours of Latricia. Strangely, as it turned out, while U.S. Marshal Gomez claimed that they were certain Dub had lived for days after the murder, new investigators do not believe this to be the case. For Gay, this was heartbreaking news. She had spent more than 20 years going on TV shows, sitting for newspaper interviews, pushing for more coverage and publicity because she had been convinced by investigators that her ex-husband and son were still alive out there, somewhere. She felt betrayed and recognized that for 2 decades she had been lied to and manipulated by investigators with the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department who either knew there was more to the story but kept it to themselves, or who were just as uninformed as she was. She cannot, for 1 second, understand why investigators ignored the information about Kadlachek and instead concocted a complex murder, abduction, and escape as planned out by Dub when there was another, just as likely suspect to pursue. Asked how she felt about learning all of that, Gay replied, quote, "You ask how I feel sometimes. Sadness, anger, guilt, and the list could go on. Every Christmas, I have to put on a happy face because of my grandchildren, but it's so difficult. Then guilt overwhelms me knowing I could not protect my son, and still to this day, I cannot get justice for him. I also live with the guilt that I neglected my other son because of this tragedy. People say I can only imagine what you go through, but the thing is, no imagination can ever know what a mother goes through until they do." End quote. Dub's remaining family have believed since day one that he was innocent of the murder and had likely been a victim himself. It's a big reason why they eventually issued an obituary, hoping that it might aid them in being provided some level of closure. Of course, the ghosts of loss, grief, and heartbreak are not so easily exorcised, and their plight was in no way aided by investigators who, for 20 years, not only denied that Dub and Chance had been victims as well, but who adamantly argued in the press that Dub himself was a cold-blooded killer and non-custodial child abductor. When you lose someone you love, whether it be by natural causes, a homicide, or anything in between, all you are left with are your memories of that person and what they meant to you. Imagine the pain of seeing your brother, son, uncle, constantly accused of murder, called a violent killer who is armed and dangerous, and there's no one to turn to because it's literally the police who are smearing his name and memory. No one, not from the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department, FBI, Kingsville Police, or Texas Rangers, has ever explained why Kadlachek was not considered a potential person of interest and investigated early on. Oh, there have been rumors, connections to law enforcement, a tight relationship with someone high up in the city or county legislature. The truth is, no one knows why. And in the 8 years since the Texas Department of Public Safety stated they now believe Dub and Chance were victims, they've never addressed that question, nor have they explained why they were able to obtain a murder warrant against Dub within 4 days of finding Latricia's body with basically no solid evidence, but more than 30 years later, they haven't developed anything about Kadlachek's alleged involvement. In frustration and grief, Gay decided to pen a letter to the man she now believes killed her ex-husband and son. She thought perhaps he might be willing to give a little, just something, to allow her to locate her son's body so she might bring him home and lay him to rest. The letter, which was provided to Lost and Found blogs from Gay herself, reads, quote, "I am the mother of Chance Wackerhagen. I am writing to you in hopes you will find it in your heart to let me know where my son's body is. Years ago, I was told you killed my son. For many years, all I wanted was for you to pay and know the pain I was feeling. I then realized nothing is going to bring Chance back to me. The only thing I hope for now is closure. Finding his body and bringing him home is the only thing that will give me closure. I know you are a father and should realize how I feel. Chance's body needs to come home to me and be buried in my family cemetery. I don't believe you meant to kill Chance. I don't care if you ever pay for what you have done, because I truly believe you pay for it every day of your life. I'm not asking you to confess or turn yourself in any means you see fit. I am asking you to somehow just let me know where Chance's body is. From one parent to another, I hope you can understand how I feel. I know your son is very important to you, so you should understand what I am asking of you. Please find it in your heart to do this for me. I do not believe you really meant to hurt anyone. This got out of control, and all you wanted to do was protect your son. God bless you in making your decision." End quote. She has never received an answer, and this year will mark 31 since she last saw her son. She looks back on that Christmas day with painful regret, blaming herself for allowing Chance to stay with his father a little longer. Of course, she had no way of knowing what would happen, but that provides little comfort and does nothing to alleviate the grief and anguish she continues to suffer every day. When last seen, Lee Herman Wackerhagen Jr. was described as being a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing approximately 240 pounds. He often goes by the nickname Dub, but could also go by Junior or Doug Walker. Dub had a mustache and wore glasses at the time of his disappearance and has scars on both arms and his right leg. Dub was last seen at a restaurant in Lockhart, Texas on December 26, 1993. At the time of his disappearance, Dub was 40 years old, and if alive today, he would be turning 71 this year. Chance Lee Wackerhagen has been described as a white male with blonde hair and blue-green eyes, standing 4 feet 8 inches tall and weighing approximately 75 pounds. Chance has a small dimple on his right cheek and may utilize the last name Walker. Last seen at a restaurant in Lockhart, Texas, Chance was 9 years old at the time of his disappearance and if alive, would be turning 40 this September. Photos of Chance as he was in 1993 and age-progressed images are available. When last seen, Chance was in the company of his father, as well as 38-year-old Latricia White, who was found shot to death in her bed on the morning of Monday, December 27, 1993. A bloody footprint found at the scene may suggest that Chance witnessed the horrible crime before he and his father were both targeted. 3 families were devastated by these horrible crimes. There's been no justice for the murder of Latricia White, and instead, for nearly 3 decades, law enforcement continued to perpetuate a story of Dub killing her and then running off with his son. There was evidence pointing the other way, but it was ignored. There were theories suggesting another possibility, but they were discredited. There was another potential person of interest, with means, motive, and opportunity, but no one wanted to pull on that thread for some reason. Today, all 3 families mourn, not just for their lost loved ones, but for the very justice they mistakenly believed investigators had been pursuing from the beginning. As I imagine many of you could tell from the evidence section of this episode, the murder of Latricia White and the disappearances and presumed murders of Dub and Chance Wackerhagen in terms of the investigation, is a total cluster. It looks from the outside in that for 20 years, investigators locked in tight tunnel vision on Dub as Latricia's killer and Chance's abductor, regardless of what direction the evidence pointed, regardless of what information they were given, regardless of what other potential persons of interest were there. Now, I fully admit, when you read short blurbs describing the case, they tend to leave out a lot of key information, and it's easy to leap to the same conclusions. I fully acknowledge that when I began researching this case, I was under the assumption Dub was the most likely suspect. But once I started peeling away layers, I quickly learned there was a lot more going on beneath the surface. It's a pretty forgivable mistake to make as someone who isn't connected to the case or law enforcement, but how investigators and detectives working for Caldwell County, Texas Rangers, and the FBI didn't realize their mistakes early on is mind-blowing to me. You could argue it's negligence, but it's hard to swallow this was all just the result of mistakes, misgivings, assumptions, and poor investigative work. Some folks would argue, never attribute malice to that which can be explained by neglect, ignorance, or incompetence. I have no evidence one way or another, and I have no interest in making accusations, but purely my own opinion, this wasn't just mistakes and errors. It seems as though there was a conscious, concerted effort to steer this case in one direction and one direction only. We could argue about it back and forth all day, so I guess we'll just move on. I have a hell of a lot of questions about this case that have never been answered. I can't understand why, even after the revelations of 2015 and 16, this case remains so quiet and locked up, and there are contradictions everywhere. Latricia was shot in bed, but they assumed the blood in the truck was hers, even though they didn't think she was moved. They were, quote-unquote, unaware that they were at the scene of a homicide, but they also know someone cleaned up after themselves, but somehow missed a child's bloody footprint. Does this make sense to anyone? They report no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, nothing missing from the home, and no weapons recovered, but then they refer to this as a crime of passion. Now, I think maybe what they were trying to say was this was a crime involving someone with a connection to Latricia, and that there may have been some strong emotions on both sides, but to refer to the killing of a person while they are sound asleep as a crime of passion is a bit odd to me. What's really interesting is they don't use that phrase until after they determine that Dub and Chance were also likely victims. The murder weapon in this case has always been interesting to me as well. Now, I listened to quite a few podcasts and read a lot of information about this case in preparation, and something I learned very quickly, and I'm sure some of you have as well, is your average podcaster doesn't know much about firearms. Simply referring to the weapon as a .22 doesn't answer several important questions about the type of gun used. Which type of round was used? .22 short, .22 long, .22 magnum, or .22 long rifle? Rimfire, center shot, sonic or subsonic, hollow point, or round nose? I could go on for a while here, but the point is, shooting someone in the head 6 times with a .22 could be viewed as rageful and an overly aggressive murder, overkill for lack of a better term, but it could also be seen as ensuring that the victim actually dies. Not to say it's common or uncommon per se, but bullets do strange things when they strike a body, and there have been people who have survived multiple headshots from a .22. So you can utilize the 6 shots to analyze the killer's intent and level of rage, but you could also argue it's less rage and more about the certainty of the kill. What I find most fascinating about the unknown murder weapon is why it was selected in the first place. I have a .22 caliber Glock and a .22 caliber rifle, and I can tell you right now, if I were out to take a life, I'd use one of my 9mm over the .22 any day of the week. Now, if that's all you can get your hands on, or there is some specific reason you want to use a .22, like maybe to frame someone else or because you don't want neighbors to hear the shots, then it makes a bit more sense to me. That doesn't appear to have been the case here, though. Also, if the plan is to kill not only Latricia, but 6'4", 240-pound Dub, I would 100% have something more powerful than a .22 with me, but maybe there's some reason we are unaware of that makes this weapon selection make more sense. Hell, Maybe it was just a matter of it being an older gun, which isn't registered and can't be traced, or that won't be noticed if it goes missing. Since there was such a poor investigation done at the time, and I even use the word investigation loosely, it's hard to know how exactly this might have gone down. No photos of the scene have been released, no information about the exact positioning of Latricia's body, and absolutely nothing about where Dub and Chance might have been at the time of her murder. If Latricia was asleep, why wasn't Dub in bed with her? Was the crime committed in the middle of the night or in the morning, perhaps after Dub had risen? The autopsy determined Latricia was killed between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., which unfortunately doesn't help answer any questions, but it doesn't sound like she was killed in the middle of the night. And since they were all seen out at a restaurant that day, it sounds like the murder happened closer to 6 p.m. than to 6 a.m., and therefore I have no explanation for why she was in bed unless her Monday morning shift as a nurse started really early. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and that seems to indicate to me that the door either wasn't locked or the killer possessed a key. So let's address the 6'4", 240-pound elephant in the room. How do you get past Dub under these circumstances? We have no established timeline, but it would be interesting to know if investigators were able to determine anything about how many people might have been involved in how the killer or killers managed to get into the house, kill Latricia, and then kill and or abduct Dub and Chance, taking them elsewhere. There was blood found in the home, but no confirmation as to whether or not it was all Latricia's or if Dub or Chance might have been injured there. We have no information about fingerprints found, DNA recovered, hair, fibers, nothing. Of course, if they were leaping to Dub as a suspect from the get-go, maybe they didn't go as deep with their processing of the crime scene as we would have expected them to. We simply have no way to know. Dub's truck is found in East Austin, 40 miles away, 3 days after Latricia's body is discovered. In the vehicle are some of his personal effects, wallet, checkbook, and in the bed are Christmas presents, some open, some still wrapped, a .22 caliber rifle that hasn't been used recently, and some toys. Police, to this day, refer to these items as being streaked with blood, though Gay stated she was told it was a considerable amount of blood. Either way, they assume it's Latricia's, only to learn later it's not even her blood type. In 2010, they say they're sending the blood off to the lab to determine who it belongs to, and 14 years later, they've still never said one way or the other. Gay claims an officer told her the blood belonged to two separate people who were directly related, which sure sounds like the blood is a mix of Dub and Chance's. It isn't hard to visualize that whoever left the truck at that location probably used it to transport their bodies. That, of course, would suggest the involvement of more than one person. If you're going to drive the truck all the way out there, you're going to need someone to give you a ride back. Was that truck thoroughly processed? Hard to say. We have no information on if they recovered prints or any other evidence outside of the blood and items previously listed. It would be really interesting to know if they found unidentified prints or maybe evidence that someone had wiped down the interior in order to destroy evidence. But again, we've got no solid information, and frankly, given the nature of this investigation, I don't feel that I can just assume that they would do things correctly. Now, we know investigators generally have more information or evidence than they share publicly, but I would love to know how they managed to get a probable cause to obtain a warrant for first-degree murder within hours of finding the truck. They had no witnesses, no murder weapon, no trail of evidence. They have a call from the truck made after the murder, which leads them to believe Dub was absolutely alive after Latricia was killed. But oops, that call was made in 1992, not 1993. Was that a mistake or one of those mistakes you make accidentally on purpose to aid your pursuit of a warrant? They have blood, but it's not Latricia's. They have a .22 caliber rifle, but it's ruled out as being the murder weapon. All they really had was the fact that Dub and Chance were unaccounted for, and people said he and Latricia used to argue. That seems like a pretty thin amount of information to get a judge to sign off on an arrest warrant for first-degree murder. When you compare that to the fact that, after 31 years, they haven't ever charged anyone else or obtained any other warrants even to search property, it seems pretty bizarre. I don't mean to make baseless accusations, but you can easily see how people might assume this is just another case of a bunch of good old boys handling the case rather than professional, trained, and skilled officers. but I digress. 2 more warrants were issued against Dub a month after the murder, one for not returning Chance to his mother, a violation of a custody order, which makes sense. I mean, technically, Dub never brought Chance back, though apparently no one considered the possibility that maybe they were both dead. Then the FBI issues a warrant saying that Dub unlawfully fled the state of Texas to avoid prosecution. Again, sure, you can't find him, so you assume he's fled, and that makes sense to me, but here's something that doesn't. This warrant, to date, is still active, and according to the Western District of Texas, the last action on it took place on August 16th, 2021, when a new judge was assigned. Why 5 years after police acknowledged that they now believe Dub and Chance were killed, are they still keeping this warrant open? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but maybe it's because the FBI was involved with this one. While initial investigators focused on all of the reasons why they thought Dub would commit these crimes, friends and family took it upon themselves to try and find out what might have really happened. Thad Reagan, a close friend, went up in a plane and searched the area surrounding Latricia's home looking for signs of turned over earth or burials. He went to the house Dub was building in Maxwell. He searched his big rig, but didn't find anything. Whether or not investigators ever searched any of these places is unknown, but if they did, they certainly haven't talked about it publicly. Did Dub have any enemies who might have wanted to harm him? Hard to say, because he was treated as the suspect the whole time, so it doesn't look like anyone dug much into that possibility or the idea that he could have been a victim too. The only other name that comes up in this case, really, in terms of someone who might have wanted to harm Latricia, Dub, or both of them, is her ex-husband Ronald Kadlicek. We have alleged reports that he was infuriated that Dub disciplined his and Latricia's son, and we know that the former couple were divorced but still engaged in a vicious custody dispute. There are so many cases out there where an ex kills their former spouse. Sometimes it's about money, sometimes the kids, sometimes just all of those old arguments are still burning in their chest. Now, I haven't seen anything which convinces me that Kadlicek is the one responsible for these crimes, but that's due in large part, I assume, because the investigators didn't do any damn work to try and find any evidence that pointed in a direction that wasn't Dub. However, I would say Kadlicek was just as good of an avenue to explore as Dub was from the first moment. They assumed Dub killed Latricia and ran off with Chance because they used to argue a lot. I mean, seriously, that's pretty much what they said. Multiple people who say they argued all the time, but who also say that after the arguments, they'd be fine. They'd pop off on one another, sit in quiet tension, and then go out to dinner and move on. Okay, I understand. He lived there, and you can't find him. He has a son, and he hasn't returned him. They might not get along that well, and Latricia's mother is convinced Dub is more into her daughter than she is into him. I think it makes perfect sense to consider Dub a person of interest there and to try and figure out whether or not he was involved. What I don't understand is how you ignore Kadlicek. He's her ex-husband. Their divorce was far from amicable. They are feuding over custody of their son, and he's allegedly pissed off that Latricia allowed Dub to discipline their son. I'm not going to make the argument that Kadlicek clearly stands out, even more so than Dub, but I would feel comfortable saying if I were investigating this case, I'd be looking at both of them. They both have the means, motive, and opportunity, and yet it's only Dub who receives the intense scrutiny of law enforcement. Several people who knew both Dub and Latricia mentioned Kadlicek to investigators on day one, and yet he's quickly dismissed, and 4 days later, police are loudly telling the media Dub is the prime and only suspect? Really? Much of what we know about Kadlicek beyond this point isn't something I feel comfortable calling solid fact. It comes from Gay, and while I in no way mean to impugn her character or reliability, I'd feel a little better if law enforcement would confirm these details. So, allegedly, Kadlicek admits to investigators that he was at Latricia's home the day of the murder. He supposedly says that their son left a toy behind and he went to pick it up, which is really fascinating because early reporting on the case specified that their son was out of town at the time, so I'm not sure how that all adds up. It's been alleged that Clinton was at Latricia's home on Christmas, but again, never confirmed, so it's hard to say for certain. Either way, Kadlachek allegedly tells police he called Latricia, got no answer, so he drove over, knocked on the door, got no answer again, and then left. Does that make sense to anyone? It's the day after Christmas, and your son left a toy at your ex's house, so you call, and she doesn't answer, and you decide to drive over and bang on the door, and then leave. Why not wait to call later, or tell your son, don't worry, you'll get it later? I don't know. The whole thing is so innocuous, I can't tell if it's legit or a poor cover story. Apparently, that's about as far as things went. It's been alleged that Kadlachek was asked to take a polygraph and refused, but I can't confirm that. You know, a lot of the finer details of this case could really be filled in better if law enforcement would actually give an update. The last time they said anything publicly was in 2016 when they announced Dub and Chance were victims. They noted the crimes were ones of passion and likely committed by someone who knew the victims. Kadlachek could certainly fit in there, but so could others. It's all rather vague, like after giving Kadlachek a pass so early on, they continue to keep his possible involvement clear of their declarations. Also, and maybe it's just silly of me to ask at this point, but what exactly was the new evidence that made them believe Dub and Chance were victims of the same person or persons? Was it the familial relationship between the two people whose blood was found in the back of the truck? Again, we don't know because they haven't shared any of the evidence that caused them to change their minds, and let's face it, how often do we see law enforcement actively acknowledge mistakes while announcing a change of direction? One key facet of this case that's always grabbed my attention is the phone call from Chance to his mother when he asked if he could stay longer. Gay has made it clear that this is her biggest regret in life, and while my words will likely do little to alleviate any of her pain and guilt, no one would view this call as anything other than what it was. Chance was having fun, he'd gotten presents, it's Christmas, and he wants to spend more time with his father. Gay, in being a good mother, tells him it's okay and allows it. She couldn't have foreseen this. I mean, who could? It seems like such an out-of-nowhere, inexplicable series of crimes. The reason I focus on the call, though, is because I can't help but wonder who else might have been aware of it. Did Dub tell anyone that Chance was staying longer? Did Latricia think to mention that to anyone? I ask because I have a firm belief that whoever went to the house that day to kill Latricia, and probably Dub, did not know Chance was going to be there. I have no evidentiary basis for this. Maybe it's just my own personal belief that the killer didn't want to murder a 9-year-old. Sure, maybe the child was a target, but I tend to think that the killer was under the impression that they would only find Latricia and Dub that Sunday, December 26th. It doesn't seem like Latricia and her ex were at an amicable point where they would exchange information like that, and for what reason would she need to tell her ex about Chance staying a few extra days anyway? Reading through the letter Gay sent, in which she begs to be told the location of her son's body, it sounds like she doesn't think the killer wanted to harm Chance. That footprint in blood takes on a different shade when you realize there's a good chance that the child heard something and walked into the room only to find himself staring at the killer, and in that moment, the killer decided that Chance would have to be murdered as well. There's really only two reasons I can see doing that. Because the child can identify you by name and sight, or because he was always a target too. Unfortunately, we just have no way of knowing. Despite how people viewed Dub, whether he was a devoted father, gentle giant, controlling and jealous boyfriend who was verbally abusive, or more likely a complex blend of all of these features, there is one truth that absolutely no one denies. Dub loved Chance more than anything in the world. He loved him so much, he defended him even when he knew he was wrong. He got into arguments because of his blind love for his son. Not one person ever believed for even a second that Dub would ever lay a violent hand on Chance. That's part of why they assumed that Dub had to have fled with the boy, because no one could imagine him ever harming his son. According to Gay, she later learned that Dub had been working with a lawyer and was planning to go back to court to fight for custody. If indeed Chance was killed, it seems fairly apparent that Dub was the least likely one to be responsible. But there is no doubt he would have died to protect his son, and he probably did. It's a confused, beat-down, chaotic mess of a case. The evidence is thin, the investigation weak, the theory's a mix of solid fact and alleged but unproven facts. Could Dub have killed Latricia, fled with Chance, and still be alive out there somewhere? Nothing's impossible, but it seems highly improbable that neither has ever surfaced 31 years later. Police theorized for 2 decades that they had fled into Mexico, but somehow they never got any reports of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed 6'4" American hanging out with a kid down there. Seems like the kind of thing that might stand out, and yet they remain convinced that that was what happened. 22 years later, the tables flip, and all of a sudden they're just as convinced that Dub and Chance were also killed by the same person or persons that killed Latricia. How, why, and what information they possess to change things remains unknown. They haven't said anything about a person of interest or a suspect, whereas 30 years ago, they were real quick to say Dub had done everything when they had even less evidence then. It's difficult to offer much analysis about anything pertaining to Kadlacek. We know little about him, his life, his relationships, and how many times he's been contacted by authorities. Much like with Dub, we have a lot of speculation, and while there's a lot of smoke, there's probably some fire there. Could he have been involved? Well, I don't think you can completely rule him out. Without additional information, however, you can't completely rule him in either. Unfortunately, that seems to be the nature of this case. Stagnant, frozen, contradictory, and as wide open as it was the day Latricia's body was found. Unless someone comes forward with new information, solid evidence is discovered, a suspect is identified, or someone outright confesses, it appears that the murder of Latricia White and the disappearance of Lee and Chance Wackerhagen will remain open, unsolved, and growing cold. If you're looking for more information about the murder of Latricia White and the disappearance of Dub and Chance Wackerhagen, there are many news sites and forums discussing their case. For this episode, the Austin American-Statesman and Lockhart Post-Register were the most helpful. I would also like to recommend checking out Lost and Found blogs, as well as the Lost and Found podcast, as Heather has done extensive work on this case and provided me with vital information. I'll post links to her work in the show notes. Beyond that, Unsolved Mysteries has done an episode on this case, and other podcasts have also touched on it, including but not limited to The Trail Went Cold, Criminology, and Crime Lines. If you have any information about this case, please contact the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department at 512-398-6777. It is case number 9312063. You can also contact the Texas Department of Public Safety Criminal Investigative Services Southern Region at 956-565-7611. It is case number 93-18851. You can also contact the Texas Missing Persons Clearinghouse at 1-800-346-3243, where Chance is case number A9401004. What do you believe happened? Tweet me at traceevpod, email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com, or comment in the Facebook group. Just a quick reminder, if you're planning to attend CrimeCon this year in Nashville from May 31st through June 2nd, use promo code TRACE at crimecon.com to save 10% on your pass. That's promo code TRACE at crimecon.com. Now, I'd like to take a moment to thank our amazing Patreon producers, without whom Trace Evidence would not be possible. A massive thank you to Andrew Guarino, Ann M. Bertram, Camelia Tyler, Christine Greco, Danny Renee, Denise Dingsdale, Desiree Lauro, Donna Buttram, Deani Dyson, Jennifer Winkler, Justin Snyder, Kara Moreland, KY, Lars Jensen Fangel, Leslie B., Lisa Hobson, Madison Lahoulier, Melissa Breckheisen, Nick Mohar Schurz, Roberta Jansen, Ruth, Stacy Finnegan, Stephanie Joyner, Tom Radford, and Wend Organ. I want to thank you all so much for your support. It means the world to me, and you are truly the lifeblood of this podcast. If you're interested in supporting the show and listening to your episodes ad-free, please visit patreon.com/traceevidence or click the support option on the official website at trace-evidence.com. This concludes our look into the murder of Latricia White and the disappearance of Dub and Chance Wackerhagen, a solvable case that has unfortunately been very poorly investigated, but it's never too late for the truth to be found. I want to thank you all again for listening, and I hope you'll join me next week for another unsolved case on the next episode of Trace Evidence.